You still scraping by, my brother mocked. I make more in a month than you do in a year, he added. Later his boss thanked me. Your investment saved our company. My brother froze. Wait, you're the new joint owner, he stammered. Careful, I warned, smirking. I can't guarantee everyone keeps their jobs. My name is Eliza Harwood. I'm 30 years old. 5 years ago, I ceased to exist in the story my family tells about itself. It started not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a briefcase latch. My brother Robert stood in my grad school workshop, the air thick with the metallic tang of flux. The scent was on my clothes, under my nails, the smell of my own work of progress. He was admiring my prototype, a small, unassuming gray box designed to be a low-cost home sensor. It read air quality, motion, humidity, a whole suite of data for a fraction of the cost of anything on the market. He picked it up, his fingers tracing the seams of the casing I'd 3D printed myself. He called the design brilliant. The word felt like a pickpocket's compliment, a distraction while he was sizing up my pockets. I was naive, though I was proud. I walked him through the whole thing, the schematics spread out on my workbench like a map to a hidden treasure. I even told him about the ghost in my own machine, a vulnerability in the firmware. It's a weird bug, I explained, pointing to a line of code on my monitor. If you run a microwave or a blender nearby, it can cause the sensor to reboot, something about the frequency interference. It's the last big problem I have to solve before I can really call it finished. He nodded, his eyes alight with an intensity I mistook for shared passion. He left with my research notes, copies of my schematics, and every ounce of my trust. I didn't know it then. I didn't know it until his pitch deck for a new startup went viral a week later, my brilliant design featured on every slide under his name. The confrontation wasn't a shouting match. There was no catharsis, no explosion of righteous anger. It was a formal, chilling meeting in my parents' living room, a space that had always felt like home but now felt like an interrogation room. The air was still and heavy, smelling of lemon polish and betrayal. Robert was there, sunk into an armchair with his lawyer, Gavin Price, a man with a professionally concerned face and a leather briefcase. My parents were there as character witnesses for the prosecution. They sat together on the sofa, a united front of disappointment aimed squarely at me. I laid it out calmly, the dates on my thesis drafts, the timestamps on my code repositories, the simple, undeniable fact that Robert had taken my work. They didn't deny it, they just relabeled it. An investment, Robert called it, finally looking up from his expensive shoes. A collaboration, Mom offered, her voice pleading. Dad was more direct. He leaned forward, his expression stern. Robert has an opportunity, Eliza, a real one. We can't let sibling rivalry ruin that. Sibling rivalry. That's what they called it. Grand theft repackaged as a childish squabble. Mom's contribution was simpler, a knife wrapped in silk. Think of the family, she whispered, her eyes glossy with manufactured emotion. This is for all of us. For them, the theft wasn't the problem. My refusal to be silent was. Gavin Price, the lawyer, said nothing. He just waited, letting the weight of my parents' words press down on me. Then, with a practiced slowness, he placed a thin stack of papers on the coffee table and slid it toward me. A non-disclosure agreement. My name was already typed on it, a neat, final insult. The payout was insultingly small, just enough to cover my student loans and tell me my silence was cheap. My goal was simple. I wanted my name on my work. Their obstacle was even simpler. They wanted my name gone. I looked at Robert, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He was suddenly fascinated by a loose thread on the arm of his chair. He, the tech visionary, the brilliant innovator, couldn't even face his own sister. Then I looked at Mom and Dad. Their faces were set with the grim determination of people doing something they know is wrong for what they've decided are the right reasons. They had already mourned my side of the story. Now they were just waiting for me to sign the death certificate. Signing the NDA felt like holding my breath until I passed out, a forced surrender, a quiet suffocation. The pen felt impossibly heavy in my hand, a dead weight. Every letter of my signature was an act of self-betrayal, scratching my own name off my own life's work. I pushed the document back across the table. Gavin Price picked it up without a word, checked the signature, and placed it neatly inside his briefcase. He snapped the latch closed. It was the same quiet, final click I'd heard in my workshop. My family sighed in collective relief. The problem me was solved. The awkwardness was over. They could go back to being proud of their son, unburdened by the truth. As I walked out of the room, my legs feeling unsteady, Dad's voice followed me. "This is for the best, Eliza, you'll see." I didn't see. I went to a damp sublet across town, a place with peeling paint and windows that rattled when the bus went by. The first thing I did was unpack my soldering iron. The familiar, acrid smell of burning flux was a bitter comfort. My confrontation was over, my work was not. My new life smelled of mildew and burnt coffee. The payout from the NDA, the price of my silence, was gone in 6 months. It evaporated into rent for my miserable one-room apartment, packets of ramen noodles, and raw materials for my new workbench. I bought components with my grocery money, carefully choosing between a resistor and a carton of eggs. To keep the lights on, I got a job at the university library, shelving books in the silent, dusty aisles. My world had shrunk to the size of that room, my interactions limited to the rustle of pages and the hum of old fluorescent lights. Every night was a battle against despair, a fight I waged with a soldering iron and schematics I drew from memory on the back of overdue book notices. I wasn't just rebuilding the sensor, I was rebuilding myself piece by meticulous piece. The isolation was absolute. My phone never rang with a call from Mom or Dad. There was no text from Robert saying, "I'm sorry," just a profound, echoing silence from the people who were supposed to be my foundation. I was a ghost in my own city, erased from the family I once had. In that crushing quiet, my work became my only companion. It didn't lie, it didn't make excuses. It didn't ask me to be smaller or quieter for someone else's comfort. It just was, and in its unblinking honesty, I started to find my footing again. Late one night, fueled by the dregs of a pot of cheap, bitter coffee, I finally solved it. The ghost in the machine, the firmware problem that had plagued my original design. I stared at the lines of code on my screen, a solution so elegant and simple it almost felt obvious. I knew the vulnerability Robert stole was still in his product. I'd seen the user complaints bubbling up in online forums, dozens of people confused about why their brand new, expensive Aura home sensor would randomly reboot. The company's official response, which I read with a cold knot in my stomach, dismissed it as user error or signal interference from outdated home appliances. They were lying. I knew it was the ghost, the flaw I had warned him about. I didn't just fix the flaw, I tore the whole thing down and rebuilt it from the ground up. I wrote stronger security measures into the code, building a digital wall so high and so thick that nothing could get over it. I found a more efficient way to process the sensor data, which made it faster and lowered the power consumption. I even sourced new components that made it cheaper to produce. This new version wasn't just a copy of what they'd stolen. It was a definitive, inarguable improvement. It was proof. My white-hot anger, which had burned for months, finally cooled into a hard, dense core of purpose. They stole my first draft. I would perfect the final edition. They owned the product, but I owned the solution. And that was a power they couldn't force me to sign away. I couldn't market my new, improved design in the United States. The NDA was a gag order and a non-compete clause rolled into one tidy, suffocating package. Any attempt to launch a similar product here would bring Robert's lawyers down on me with the full force of their billable hours. So I looked overseas. My nights were spent sending emails to companies in Europe and Asia, anyone who might need what I had built. After dozens of rejections, I found a small medical supply company in Germany. They needed reliable, low-cost sensors to monitor air quality in rural clinics, places where budgets were tight and equipment had to be tough. My design was perfect for them. I licensed it for a modest upfront fee and a small percentage of their sales. The first royalty check arrived 3 months later. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but holding it in my hand, I felt a sense of ownership I hadn't felt in a year. It was mine, earned with the work they had tried to erase. With that money, I didn't buy a new couch or move to a better apartment. I made an appointment with a financial manager who specialized in discrete trusts. I sat across a polished desk from Owen Blake, the trustee, a man with graying hair and calm, intelligent eyes. I told him I wanted to start buying shares in a specific, privately held tech startup. Anonymously, he didn't ask why. He just nodded and told me how. A blind trust. A legal structure that would allow me to buy parts of the company without my name ever appearing on a single document. The plan was born right there in his quiet office. I would use their success, the success built on my stolen work, to buy my way back to the table. Owen Blake became my only confidant, though he knew only the mechanics of my plan, never the raw emotion that fueled it. He set up the blind trust, a dry legal entity with a generic name. To the world, it was just another small investment vehicle. To me, it was my battering ram. Every royalty check from Germany, every penny I saved from my library job went directly to Owen. He began his work buying small lots of employee shares from Robert's company or a home. It was a slow, patient hunt. An engineer moving to a new city, a marketing associate needing a down payment for a house, people leaving the company, happy to get cash for their shares without the hassle of waiting for the company to go public. It was painstakingly slow, a few shares here, a dozen there. For the first year, my ownership was a fraction of a single percent. It felt like throwing pebbles at a fortress wall. I lived frugally, my world still confined to that damp apartment. My life got smaller so my leverage could grow larger. I tracked Aura Home's performance obsessively, reading every press release, every financial report I could get my hands on. Every market dip was an opportunity for Owen to buy more for less. Every surge in their valuation was a bitter reminder of what they had built on my foundation. Meanwhile, Robert was on the covers of tech magazines, hailed as a tech wunderkind. I was in my sublet, eating canned soup and quietly, methodically buying his company out from under him, one share at a time. Robert's company, Aura Home, was a runaway success. Their sensors were everywhere. I'd see the sleek, white boxes in friends' apartments mounted on their living room walls. I'd see them featured on morning shows, touted as the next big thing in smart home technology. Every time, it felt like a physical blow, a gut punch that left me breathless. It was my work, my design, my late nights and busted knuckles, but with my name sanded off, leaving a smooth, marketable surface with Robert's smiling face plastered over it. Worse than the stolen credit was the knowledge of the flaw. I knew that in millions of homes across the country there was a back door, a tiny, invisible vulnerability that only I understood. I read Robert's quotes in interviews, full of corporate jargon he'd clearly learned from a public relations consultant. He talked about his design process, his moments of inspiration, his late nights in the lab. He was performing my life for an audience and they were giving him a standing ovation. The most painful part was when my parents would forward me the articles. "Aren't you so proud of your brother?" Mom would write in the body of the email, the question a casual, devastating cruelty. I never replied. My silence was the only honest thing I had left to give them. I just saved the articles in a folder on my computer labeled evidence, and I sent another check to Owen. I couldn't avoid my family forever. Thanksgiving and Christmas were mandatory performances of happiness, staged productions where I was expected to play my part. The conversations were minefields. "So what are you up to these days, Eliza?" Dad would ask, his voice carrying a distinct, patronizing edge. "Still tinkering with your little projects?" Robert would hold court, talking loudly about sales figures, new hires, and plans for international expansion. He'd glance at me across the dinner table, a smirk playing on his lips, expecting what? Applause? Forgiveness? I just nod and offer a quiet, "That's great, Robert." They mistook my quietness for defeat. They saw it as acceptance of my new place in the family hierarchy. In the kitchen, while loading the dishwasher, Mom would pull me aside. "It's really time to let it go, honey," she'd say, her hand on my arm. "Just be happy for him. It's better for everyone this way." They had written the story, cast me as the bitter, unsuccessful sister, and now they were angry that I wouldn't play my part with more enthusiasm. I'd leave those gatherings feeling hollowed out, the weight of my secret pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The isolation was the hardest part. I was moving an army across a battlefield, an army of slow, patient dollars, and no one could even see the soldiers. But these encounters, as painful as they were, sharpened my resolve. They didn't just want my work, they wanted my submission. They would get neither. About 3 years into my plan, Orahome hit a rough patch. A new competitor launched a cheaper, though vastly inferior, product. The market, always fickle, overreacted. Orahome's projected value dipped. Investors got nervous. Robert, who had never weathered a real storm, panicked. He made a series of public statements that were meant to be reassuring but only fan the flames of uncertainty. He lacked the deep technical knowledge to explain why his product was superior, so he just blustered. For me, this was a new kind of vulnerability. What if his incompetence ran the company into the ground before my plan could come to fruition? I'd be left with a controlling interest in a pile of rubble. Then Owen called. "The price is low," he said, his voice calm as ever. "This is the time to acquire a larger stake, but it's a risk. If they can't pull out of this dip, the shares could become worthless." Inside the company, nervous employees who had been granted stock were looking to sell. They wanted out before things got worse. It was an opportunity I couldn't afford to miss. I liquidated everything. The small savings I'd managed to build, the emergency fund I kept for a broken-down car or a medical bill. I sent it all to the trust. It was a huge gamble. If the company went under, I'd lose everything I'd spent 3 years building. "Do it," I told Owen, my heart pounding. He executed the buys over the next few days. When the dust settled, my ownership stake had jumped from 4% to 15% in a single week. I was no longer a pebble. I was a cornerstone. The first public crack appeared on a small but influential tech blog. The headline read, "Orahome's Annoying Little Glitch." The article detailed with painstaking accuracy how the company's popular sensors would randomly reboot whenever a microwave or a blender was used nearby. It was my ghost. The firmware flaw, the exact issue I had pointed out to Robert in my workshop all those years ago, he had never fixed it. He just built a billion-dollar company around it. Orahome's official response, posted a few hours after the article went live, was predictably dismissive. They blamed unusual signal interference from outdated home appliances and assured customers that their data was secure. It was a lie. It wasn't the appliance. It was the insecure code in the sensor itself, a door I had left unlocked and he had sold to the world. This article was the first hard proof visible to everyone that I was right and they were wrong. It wasn't just a technical problem anymore, it was a credibility problem. The comments section of the blog exploded. Hundreds of customers confirmed the same issue, sharing stories of their devices resetting at all hours. The problem was far wider than Orahome was willing to admit. I saved a PDF of the article and the entire comments section. It was Exhibit A in a case no one knew I was building. The stock dipped again after the blog post. Inside Orahome, I heard through Owen's discreet channels morale was tanking. The engineering team knew the official response was a lie and they were frustrated. That's when Owen received an email. A senior engineer, one of the first people Robert had hired, was leaving the company. He was disgusted with management's handling of the security flaw and wanted to sell his entire block of vested shares. He had a lot of them. He didn't want to sell on the open market and spook investors further. He wanted a quiet, private transaction. He just wanted out. It was a huge block of shares, far more than any single employee had sold before. Acquiring it would be expensive. It would drain the very last of my resources, the final dregs of my royalty income and savings. But the math was undeniable. It would take my stake from 15% to 34%. Not a majority, but enough to make me the largest single shareholder in the entire company. The time for caution was over. I was done throwing pebbles. Make the deal, I told Owen. Whatever it takes. The transaction was completed in 24 hours. I burned my last financial bridge, pouring every dollar I had into the company that had been stolen from me. I now had a powerful voice, even if no one yet knew that the voice was mine. A few weeks later, I was at my dad's 60th birthday party, a mandatory family event held in my parents' backyard, the same yard where I'd grown up. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and barbecue smoke. Robert was holding court by the grill, a beer in his hand, bragging to a circle of my dad's friends about a new partnership his company had just signed. He was smug, overconfident, a man playing the part of a successful chief executive officer. He saw me standing by the drink table and made his way over, a smirk plastered on his face. "Hey, Eliza," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You still scraping by with that library job? I probably make more in a month than you do in a whole year." The words were meant to sting, to remind me of my place. But they didn't, not like they used to. They sounded desperate. The hollow bravado of a man who knows his foundation is cracked. I just gave him a faint smile. Something like that. Later, Laura Benton, the chief executive officer Robert had hired to run the company's day-to-day operations, was making the rounds. She looked tired, her smile tight around the edges. My dad, oblivious, introduced us. "Laura, this is my other child, my daughter Eliza." She shook my hand, her grip firm. Her eyes scanned my face with a flicker of recognition I couldn't quite place, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. The moment was strange and tense, an undercurrent of unspoken knowledge passing between us. I knew the company was far more fragile than Robert was letting on, and now its chief executive officer had seen my face. Just before I left, as I was saying my goodbyes, Laura Benton cornered me by the back door. Her voice was low, confidential. "I'm sorry to bother you," she started. "I know who your family is, but I have to say something. Our board chair, a man named Mark Dwyer, has been telling me about a crucial silent partner who has been methodically buying up employee shares and stabilizing our stock for the past year." She looked me straight in the eye. "Your trustee, Owen Blake, has a formidable reputation. Whoever he represents has single-handedly saved our company from a hostile takeover twice this year without anyone even knowing. If you ever speak to them, thank them for me." She thought I was just the founder's forgotten sister. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. It was the first external validation of my entire 5-year plan. I hadn't just been plotting revenge, I had been a force for stability, protecting my own work from the vultures on Wall Street. I met her eyes, letting her see the sincerity in mine. "I'll be sure to pass that along." I walked away from the party, my heart racing. I got into my car, drove a block away, and pulled over. I called Owen. "It's time," I said, my voice shaking slightly, not with fear but with adrenaline. "The chief executive officer knows a silent partner is propping them up. I think she might be an ally. We need to move." The forced pivot was here. I could no longer just be an investor. I had to become a player. Owen Blake called the next morning. His voice was all business. "The purchase of the engineer's shares has been finalized and recorded. At 34%, you are now the largest shareholder of record. You are legally entitled to demand a seat on the board of directors." The choice was stark and immediate. I could remain anonymous, a powerful but hidden force pulling strings from the shadows, or I could step into the light and become a target. Anonymity had been my shield for 5 years. Giving it up meant facing my family directly in a boardroom with lawyers present. It meant war, but a seat on the board also meant access. It meant the right to see the company's books, its internal reports, and any and all documents related to the censor flaw. I could no longer be a ghost haunting the company. The ghost had to materialize. A major truth suddenly flipped my entire plan on its head. Fixing the problem required my presence, not just my money. I thought about Laura Benton's tired eyes. She was trapped, trying to run a company built on a lie she probably didn't even know the full extent of. I took a deep breath. "Owen," I said, "don't just demand a seat for the trust. Tell the board chair, Mark Dwyer, that I will be the one filling it." Eliza Harwood. 2 days later, a second truth bomb landed, this one from a source I had carefully cultivated over the past year, a junior tech reporter I'd occasionally fed anonymous, unverifiable tips about the industry. He sent me a message, just one line: "Watchdog is about to bark. Loud." I knew exactly what he meant. A major product safety watchdog group led by a relentless investigator named Jordan Pierce was about to release a report on Aura Home. I pressed my source for details. The report, he said, didn't just mention the rebooting glitch, it classified the firmware flaw as a significant security risk. The vulnerability wasn't just an annoyance. It could allow a bad actor on the same Wi-Fi network to access the device's data stream. It wasn't just about reboots, it was about privacy. It meant someone could potentially spy on people inside their own homes. The problem was infinitely wider than I had even imagined. It was a liability that could bankrupt the company and put thousands of customers in real danger. My commitment was no longer just about getting credit for my work. It was a moral imperative to force a recall and fix the danger I had inadvertently helped create. The personal cost was suddenly crystal clear. If I stepped forward now in the midst of this coming storm, I'd be blamed for all the ensuing chaos. But if I didn't, people could get hurt. The choice was easy. I made another call to Owen. The plan had to change again. Faster, bigger. A single board seat wasn't enough anymore. It wouldn't give me the power to act quickly enough. "We're not just taking a seat," I said, the words feeling solid and heavy in my mouth. "We're taking control." I instructed him to use my 34% stake to form a coalition with other large shareholders, the ones who were already nervous about the company's direction and dipping stock price. The goal was no longer just to get inside the building. The goal was to force a shareholder vote, oust Robert and his allies from the board, and install a new chairman who would listen to me. My mission was restated in bolder, riskier terms. I will take control of the company to force a full product recall and implement the secure firmware that I designed. This was an irreversible choice. It was a declaration of war out in the open. Owen was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. "This will get very public and very ugly, Eliza," he warned. "I know," I said, looking at the city lights from my small apartment window. "5 years ago they made it ugly, I'm just making it public." The silent war was over, the real one was about to begin. The board was barely done acknowledging my demand for a vote when my phone lit up. "Mom," I stared at the screen for a second, then answered. Her voice came at me hot and cold all at once. "What do you think you are doing?" No hello. No breath, I swallowed. "I'm doing what should have been done years ago. There's a flaw in the product, Mom. It could hurt people. It needs to be fixed, and the company needs to tell the truth." She cut me off like I'd said nothing. "You are trying to destroy your brother, to humiliate this family, after everything we've done for you." The last part landed like a punch. I could see her on our living room couch in my head, one hand pressed to her temple like she was the victim here. Dad took the phone, his tone had that firm, father knows best weight to it. "You're being reckless, Eliza. Robert made a mistake, sure, but he built something. You're acting like a shark, not a daughter." I took a breath and kept my voice steady. "Dad, this isn't about jealousy, it's about safety and honesty. I'm not trying to blow anything up, I'm trying to stop a bigger explosion." He exhaled, a tired, theatrical sigh I'd known my whole life. "You signed a non-disclosure agreement, you took the money, you had your chance to be part of this family decision and you chose to make it hard. I signed because you pushed me to. That doesn't make the lie true." Mom grabbed the phone back. Her voice sharpened. "Don't twist this. You don't get to torch your brother's life because you're bitter. If you keep going, don't call this house again. Do you understand me?" For a second, I felt something tear inside my chest, like a thin thread finally snapping. "I understand," I said. "I love you, but I'm not going to stop." She hung up. The room felt too quiet afterward. I stood there holding the phone to my ear, listening to a dead line. Outside my window, a bus rumbled by and rattled the glass. Somewhere on my floor, a baby started crying and someone's television laughed canned laughter. I set the phone on the counter and leaned my forehead against the cabinet door, cold fake wood against my skin. I'd lost my family once. Now I'd lost them again, only this time I was the one who made the cut. It was a necessary amputation, I told myself. Still, the stump ached. The next morning, the blowback arrived dressed as respectable news. A financial blog with a smug tone ran a piece about me. The headline called me a disgruntled former consultant, which was creative at least. The article said I had a personal vendetta against a beloved founder. They didn't say what the non-disclosure agreement was about, of course they didn't, but they hinted that I'd been pushed out for poor performance. It was a neat, ugly story, easy to share, easier to believe. My phone started buzzing with texts from numbers I hadn't seen in years. "You okay? What is this about? Is any of it true?" A college friend sent a link with a row of question marks and a sad face. I opened the article, read my name on the screen, and felt like I was watching someone else drown from the shore. The quotes from people familiar with the matter sounded like they'd been written by a public relations firm. They painted me as a jealous shadow trying to tear down a successful brother. The worst part was the comments, strangers picking me apart like buzzards. I clicked out before it could burrow any deeper. Owen called, his voice steady like a hand on my shoulder. "Do not respond," he said. "Not to the reporter, not on social media, not to anyone. The non-disclosure agreement means they can say things without details. You can't defend yourself without breaking it. Let them talk. We hold the line." I wanted to fight. I wanted to write a 1,000-word reply and staple it to the internet. Instead, I sat on my bed and typed 3 different responses to 3 different people, then deleted them all. My mother's words kept replaying, "Don't call this house again." By afternoon, a couple of investors who'd been warm to our coalition stopped taking Owen's calls. A board member who'd said he was leaning my way sent a short email that was basically a shrug. I felt the ground tilt under me. I heated a leftover bowl of noodles and forgot to eat it until it went cold. The non-disclosure agreement had become a gag, my own promise twisted and used as a club to hit me with. I closed my laptop and pressed my thumbs into my eyelids until stars sparked behind them. I told myself out loud, "Let them talk." It sounded brave for about 5 seconds, then the apartment fell quiet again. Mark Dwyer asked to meet the next day at a small hotel lounge that always smelled like citrus and old carpet. He chose a corner table with a view of the door. He wore a charcoal jacket and the expression of a man trying to hold 3 glass balls in the air. I ordered tea I wouldn't drink. He folded his hands. "Eliza, I want to be frank. I've got investors calling me all morning. They're worried this is turning into a family brawl. They want stability." "I understand," I said. "Stability is exactly what I want." My voice sounded calm, even to me. "We have a product in homes across the country with a known weakness. It can be fixed. I can fix it, but we need to be honest about it first." He watched me like I was a chess move he hadn't seen before. "Is this about the origin of the product?" he asked. His tone had shifted into carefulness. I chose each word like it might blow up in my hands. "There are questions about where some ideas came from and how risks were handled. I signed a non-disclosure agreement years ago. I'm not here to relitigate that. I'm here because there's a danger that needs to be addressed." He leaned back. "The articles paint you as someone with a score to settle. Their story is simpler." I know, my hands wrapped around the warm cup, grateful for the heat. "Simple isn't the same as true," he sighed. "Here's my problem. If I back you and it looks like the company is being torn apart by a sibling feud, the stock sinks. If I back Robert and I'm wrong about the safety issue, the company sinks for a worse reason." He tapped his finger on the table, thinking, "I need to do what is best for the company's stability. I need time." "We don't have much," I said. A product safety group is circling. If we act fast, we control the story. If we stall, the story controls us. He nodded like he'd heard me, but I saw the way his eyes slid to the door when it opened and someone in a suit walked in. A board member. He stood, straightened his jacket. "I appreciate you coming," he said. "I'll be in touch." No promise, no plan. He walked away, his back a polite wall. When I stepped outside, the wind cut through my coat. I stood under the hotel awning as a light drizzle started, the kind that soaks you without looking like much. Cars hissed by on wet pavement. A bus sighed at the corner and opened its doors to no one. My phone buzzed. A short message from Owen. "Two of our maybes are wobbling." I typed back, "Stay on them." Then I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked down the block with my shoulders up around my ears, trying to hold in the heat. I'd left that meeting with less than I'd brought to it. That was a new kind of hunger. The email from Clara arrived just after midnight, when the city was quiet enough that I could hear my upstairs neighbor's dog thump its tail against the floor. Subject line: "From one woman who reads the fine print to another." My first thought was spam, then I opened it. She introduced herself in a few clean lines: independent auditor working on a review of a supplier that sold parts to Aura Home. In the course of her audit, she'd been given access to a set of internal notes and attached messages. Some of those messages, she wrote, contained my brother's name. "I cannot share raw files tied to my client," she said, "but I can share a redacted summary that speaks to your concerns." A link followed. My hand hovered over the trackpad a second longer than it should have. Then I clicked. A document opened, black boxes covering names and addresses here and there, but the core was intact. A year-old chain of emails between Robert and a lead engineer. The engineer's message was precise and impossible to misread. A rundown of the exact security problem described as a ticking time bomb, a list of risks, a clear recommendation. "Stop shipments, patch the code, warn customers." The next message was short. It read like ice. "Bury it. A recall would kill our stock price. We'll fix it quietly in version 2. I didn't realize my jaw had clenched until my teeth ached. I scrolled through the rest with a kind of slow dread. There were follow-ups. The engineer pushing again, Robert repeating the order. The tone wasn't frantic. It was bored. Like he was swatting a fly. I printed the document because I needed to see it on paper. The printer in the corner rattled and whined like always, then spat out warm pages that slid into my hands. The ink smelled sharp. I spread them on the table and the light above me made the black boxes shine. It wasn't just theft anymore. It wasn't just him writing a stolen idea to glory. It was a cover-up that put real people in harm's way. I tipped back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The plaster yellowed around the light fixture. An odd calm settled in. There it was, the truth in writing, proof I hadn't wanted to need. My anger felt less like a fire now and more like a deep current. I wrote Clara back. "Thank you," I typed. "If you are ever pressed, I will not reveal your name." She replied a minute later. "I trust you'll use it for repair, not revenge." I sat with that for a moment, the weight and the hope in it. "That's the plan," I wrote. Then I gathered the papers into a neat stack, squared the edges with my hand, and set them in the center of the table like a compass pointing to north. My phone rang while I was still staring at Clara's redacted pages. It was my tech reporter. He didn't bother with hello. "It's happening," he said. "The watchdog is going public." I straightened in my chair. A car alarm chirped twice outside, distant and thin. "How long?" I asked. He blew out a breath. "Jordan Pierce gave Aura Home 48 hours to announce a recall and a plan to fix the firmware. He wants a timetable. He wants the update out the door. The deadline hits the morning of your vote." I looked at the printed emails spread on my table and felt the clock start ticking in my veins. "If they refuse?" I asked. "He'll issue a warning," the reporter said. "He'll tell people to unplug the devices. Immediately." The word hung in the room. Immediately, I thanked him and hung up. For a minute, I just listened to the quiet. The refrigerator hummed and clicked. A siren moaned, then faded. 48 hours. If the company didn't comply, the warning would land like a hammer. The stock would fall off a cliff, not a dip, a drop. The thought made my stomach flutter like I'd swallowed a handful of bees. I pictured families around the country, kids playing on living room floors, a white box on the wall quietly feeding data out through a hole Robert wanted to patch later. Later was gone. Later had become now. I texted Owen. "We're on a deadline, 48 hours. If we don't control the vote, we lose the company to the ground." Dots danced, then his answer, "Understood, I'll push our fence sitters." "But they're skittish." I rubbed my temple with my knuckles until the skin warmed. Everything I'd built over 5 years, all the careful patience, it had collapsed into 2 days. It wasn't only my money on the line, it was my work's life. It was the people who put that work in their homes, trusting it. I pictured the watchdog statement in my mind like a headline scrolling across a screen, my responsibility pressed down on my shoulders. The room suddenly felt too small, the ceiling too low. I opened a window, cold air hit my face, I breathed until my chest loosened. By afternoon, the door buzzer rasped through the apartment like an electric razor. I wasn't expecting a package. I pushed the button and a man's voice said, "Courier." He climbed the stairs, footsteps hollow and fast, and handed me a thick envelope with my name typed across a white label. I signed, closed the door, and set it on the table next to Clara's printouts. My hands knew before my mind did. I slid a finger under the flap and pulled out heavy paper with a fancy letterhead, Gavin Price. The language had sharp corners even in plain speak. "Stop what you're doing. Stop talking to board members. Stop pushing for a vote." The letter called my actions a campaign of harassment. It said if I didn't back off, they'd sue me for everything I had and everything I might ever have. The last paragraph stood out like a slap. Any disclosure about the origin of the company's foundational technology would count as a clear break of the non-disclosure agreement I'd signed, and they'd come after the maximum they could squeeze. I read that part twice, then a third time. It wasn't just a warning, it was a cage. I pressed the paper flat with my palm, my pulse thudded in my wrist. The worst part wasn't the threat to me, it was the message. Stay quiet about the truth, even if the truth could protect people. They wanted the old Eliza, the one sitting on a couch, pen in hand, too scared to say no. I folded the letter along its creases perfectly, like I could control something by making straight lines. I slid it back in the envelope and placed it on the counter, away from Clara's pages, as if the two things might contaminate each other if they touched. I called Owen. He listened as I read the letter out loud, my voice even. "We expected this," he said. "It's meant to freeze you, don't let it." His calm steadied me. "I won't," I said. We both knew what it meant in practice. I couldn't use Clara's emails to sway anyone. I couldn't share the origin of the censor without inviting a storm I wasn't ready to weather. My path narrowed to a single, thin line: win the vote and let the watchdog's clock do its work. I looked at the pile of paper on my table. Proof on one side, threat on the other. I taped the envelope shut again, silly as it was, and dropped it in a drawer. The sound of it hitting the wood was a dull thud that seemed too loud in the room. The night before the vote, Owen and I sat on a call in the dark, both of us staring at our screens, both of us listening to the same silent stretch and pull. He had a list open, names highlighted in green, yellow, and red. "We're 2 votes short," he said finally, like he was telling me the weather would be bad. "We flipped 1 earlier, but we lost 2 this afternoon." I watched a moth ping against my ceiling light, tiny wings tapping glass. "Who?" I asked. He told me, the big funds who didn't care about the people behind the numbers. They cared about a nice, steady line on a chart. Robert's smear had spooked them. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds and opened them again. "Can we get them back?" I asked. "I'll try in the morning," he said. "But they're leaning safety in numbers. They want to see where the wind blows. Right now, the wind is loud with your brother's story." I set my phone on speaker and walked to the sink, ran water, and rinsed a mug that didn't need rinsing. "So our vote is a stage play," I said. "We enter, we speak our lines, and we lose." Owen didn't argue. He didn't offer soft words. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. "If we lose," he said, "we regroup." But I won't lie, the watchdog's warning will hit the same day. If we're on the outside, we don't get to steer the response. The stock will drop hard, your steak will be worth a lot less by sunset. I looked at the window. My reflection looked back at me blurry. Okay, I said. Thank you. He paused. Get some sleep, Eliza. After we hung up, I didn't sleep. I lay on my back and watched headlights crawl across the ceiling in thin, pale bands. Somewhere, someone slammed a door hard enough to make the picture frames on my wall tremble. At 3 in the morning, I sat up. The lawyer's letter was still in the drawer. The auditor's email was still open on my laptop, screen dimmed to a faint glow. I had all the ammunition and the safety was stuck on. I felt like a runner in the blocks, legs shaking, gun never firing. I pictured the boardroom in my head, long table, polite faces, the shape of Robert's smirk. I pictured Mom and Dad in a waiting area, their backs straight, their disappointment ironed and starched. The helplessness pressed on my chest until breathing took effort. I told myself, you have one job tomorrow. Speak calmly and vote. It sounded so small compared to the storm. When calm snapped, it didn't do it with noise. It slid away and left a clean, blank space. Into that space came the old scene, my parents' living room 5 years ago, like a movie I couldn't look away from. Their rug, the nick on the coffee table leg, the lemon polish smell. I saw my own hand reach for a pen. I felt again the way the non-disclosure agreement paper scratched under my wrist. I remembered Dad saying, "This is for the best," in that steady way that had guided my whole childhood. I remembered how easy it was to make myself small to fit inside their idea of family. The memory hit like cold water. For a long minute, I sat very still and let it soak me. A voice I didn't like, the one that hurts you and calls it honesty, whispered, maybe they were right, maybe you're just angry, maybe your work isn't worth this. Maybe you're breaking things that didn't need to be broken. I got up and walked to my work table and picked up the printed page of my clean code like it was a lifeline. The symbols and lines meant nothing to anyone else in that moment, but to me they were a clear path in a fog. I whispered, "This is real." My words fogged the page for a second and faded. I ran a finger along the edges and felt the tiny bite of the paper. Truth can be a quiet thing. It doesn't shout. It sits and waits for you to come back to it. I set the paper down and looked around my tiny apartment like it could answer me. The radiator clicked, then quieted. Pipes hummed in the walls. The city outside scooped up the night and held it. The pain in my chest changed shape. It wasn't the burn of humiliation. It was the ache of being made invisible by the people who were supposed to see me first. Money couldn't fix that. A vote couldn't fix that. Even winning wouldn't give me the family I wanted, but it could give me something fair. It could give me the chance to repair what had been broken in a way that mattered beyond me. I pulled a blanket around my shoulders and sat on the floor, my back against the couch, knees up, the way I used to sit to study for exams. I made a list on the back of an old envelope, not of arguments but of actions. Show up, be steady, don't take the bait. When they question your motives, talk about customers. When they talk about family, talk about safety. When they say you're angry, don't defend your feelings, defend the fix. The words looked simple in the dim light. I rested my forehead on my knees and breathed slow. I didn't know if I'd win. I did know why I was going to walk into that room. For a second the weight shifted, not lighter, just different. I could carry it. Dawn finally crawled toward the windows, gray and thin. I made coffee that tasted like the inside of a burnt pot and drank it anyway. I put on the same navy blazer I'd worn to too many interviews where they'd smiled and said they'd call. I tied my hair back, not to look tough but to keep it out of my face so I wouldn't have to think about it. I slid Clara's emails into a folder marked notes, even though I knew I couldn't show them, like a kid pocketing a charm. I left the lawyer's letter in the drawer. I didn't need to carry that with me. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the hallway. The carpet out there had a stain shaped like a map of a country no one lived in anymore. I walked over it and went down the stairs, one hand on the railing, telling myself each step was exactly one step. Outside, the air smelled like wet concrete and old leaves. I lifted my face to it and started toward the train. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't know as I waited on the platform for a morning train. The text was short. "Can you meet? Coffee shop, corner of 4th and Main, LB." I stared at the initials until the train roared past and the wind slapped my coat around my legs. Laura Benton, the chief executive officer. I walked to the shop. It smelled like dark roast and cinnamon. Steam hissed. A bell on the door rang when I pushed it open. She was in a booth in the back, hands wrapped around a white mug, her eyes rimmed red like she hadn't slept. I slid into the seat across from her. Neither of us made small talk. "I've been doing my own digging since we met," she said, keeping her voice low as if the sugar packets might have ears. "I've seen internal reports that Robert buried. I suspect there's more that I haven't seen." She took a breath like it hurt. "We have a problem in homes, Eliza. That's the part I can't get past." I stirred my coffee even though I drink it black. "I can't show you what I have," I said. "But imagine you knew for a fact that the security flaw wasn't just known. Imagine it was deliberately hidden a year ago. Imagine it was called out clearly and still nothing was done." I watched her face, the way her jaw set. She didn't flinch, she just nodded once. "Then we have one choice," she said. "We take the hit, we recall and fix every device, we tell the truth and live with the pain." She glanced at the door as if someone might walk in and change her mind. "The watchdog report will crush us, but your plan, it's the only way I see that we survive as something worth saving." I felt my shoulders drop a fraction, like I'd set down a heavy bag. "It won't be easy," I said. She gave a small, humorless smile. "Nothing about this job is easy anymore." She reached across the table like we were about to shake on a dangerous deal. "You have my vote," she said. "It's not enough to win." "But you have it." Her fingers were cold. Mine were too. We let go. I left with the taste of burnt coffee on my tongue and a small, steady flame in my chest. It wasn't victory. It was a handhold on a cliff. Sometimes that's enough to keep climbing. The Aura Home boardroom was a long, bright box of glass and steel with a table that looked like a frozen river. The air felt colder than it needed to be. Water glasses sat on coasters like quiet props. When I walked in, chairs turned. Robert was at the head of the table with Gavin Price at his elbow, a stack of folders in front of them that probably made him feel safe. He gave me a little nod that said he expected to win. He'd always preferred that expression to an apology. Through the glass wall, I could see the waiting area. Mom and Dad were sitting side by side, their faces carved into something that looked like grief and anger pressed together. I couldn't hear them, I could feel them. It pressed against my back like a hand. Mark Dwyer called the room to order. His voice had the calm of someone used to giving bad news and good news in the same breath. He laid out the motion in steady words. A vote to remove and replace 3 board members, including Robert, and seat new ones, which would change control of the company. There was a rustle around the table, like dry leaves. Robert's allies went first, standing on their talking points like wooden boxes. One called my move a transparent attempt to settle a private score in public. Another said I was naive about how companies run and that recalls were panic buttons for children. They made eye contact with me like they were taking turns scolding a teenager. Gavin watched me with a small smile as if waiting for me to break and talk about the non-disclosure agreement. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I didn't speak. I let them do the loud part. Silence had been used to hurt me once. I could use it now to steady myself. I looked at Laura. Her face was still. Her hands were not. She turned her pen over and over between her fingers, the way people do when they've already made a decision and are waiting to say it out loud. When they were done, Mark opened the floor for comments. I took the smallest sip of water just to wet my throat and said, "We have a product in homes with a known weakness. People trust us. We have hours to act before a public warning tells them to unplug. If you vote with me, we do the hard work now and fix it. If you vote against me, we still face the same storm, only with less control." I kept it short. I sat down. The room hummed a little with nerves. The clock on the wall ticked too loud, and I wondered if anyone else could hear it. Mark raised his hand slightly, like a conductor bringing the music to a close. "Let's vote," he said. All in favor of the motion, Mark said, and hands began to rise. Mine, two directors who had seen too much chaos to keep pretending it wasn't there. Laura lifted her hand last, steady and high. I counted, the way you count breaths when you can't sleep. All opposed. Robert's hand shot up, quick as a snake. His two allies followed. Mark's eyes did a slow walk around the table. He counted again, mouth moving just barely. Then he looked down at his notes as if the paper might give him an answer and looked back up at us. The vote, he said, is a tie. A tired sound moved around the room, something between a sigh and a groan. Robert's mouth twisted into the smirk that had haunted a dozen holiday dinners. To him, a tie meant the world stayed shaped like him, but Mark didn't close the folder. He folded his hands on it like he was covering a sleeping bird. As chairman, he said, his voice still even, in the event of a tie on a matter of control, I'm empowered to cast a deciding vote. He lifted his eyes and looked at Robert, then at me. The space between those two glances stretched so long I could feel my heartbeat in my gums. I vote in favor of the motion, he said. Robert's chair scraped back with a sharp sound. You can't do this, he snapped, half standing, the color flushed high on his cheeks. I can, Mark said, and I did. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to, he turned to me. Please welcome your new controlling shareholder, Miss Eliza Harwood. My name in that room felt like a door that had been nailed shut was suddenly open. For a second I didn't move. I must have blinked. I saw, through the glass, Mom stand up fast like she'd been shoved, and Dad put a hand on her arm. Their faces were what you see when a house you love shifts and you hear wood snap inside the walls. I stood. The floor was there. The table was there. My hands were steady. Robert stared at me across the table, his mouth parted, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Wait, you... The realization slid onto him like cold water. He picked up a folder, set it down, picked it up again as if paper could save him. I met his eyes, tired down to my bones but clear. Careful, I said softly, not unkind. I let the quiet make the words bigger. I can't guarantee everyone keeps their job. I didn't make a speech about betrayal. I didn't say the word theft. I didn't talk about the non-disclosure agreement. I took a breath and did the work. My first motion, I said to the room, is to immediately and publicly comply with the product safety watchdog's demands. We will announce a full recall today. We will tell customers exactly what to do and when. I waited while the shock rolled through the room and broke. Second, I said, we hire Clara Hayes and her firm to run an independent review of everything that led us here, our code history, our messages, our decisions, and we publish their findings when they're done. Eyes narrowed, heads turned. Someone shifted in a chair with a squeak. People were deciding in front of me if I was going to be a burning match or a steady light. I kept going. Third, I said, we fix the product with the stronger locks I've already designed. We push the update fast but not sloppy. No one tapes over a cracked window. We replace it, we test it again, and we change how we build from this moment on. I looked at Laura. I'll need an interim chief technical officer to put these safety rules in place, report directly to me and Laura, and stand up a security team that answers to the board, not to marketing. We set up a clear way for anyone to raise a red flag without risking their job. We pay for outside checks twice a year. We add a recall plan to our playbook so we never hide behind silence again. There was no applause. It wasn't that kind of room, but something in the air unclenched. Laura spoke for the first time since the vote. I second the motions, she said, her voice carried. Mark nodded, rubbed his temple, and looked at faces around the table like a doctor checking a waiting room. All in favor, he said. Hands went up, even a few that hadn't risen for me before. Fear speaks one language. Relief speaks many. Robert sank into his chair, eyes fixed on nothing, as if the wall might offer him a different outcome if he stared hard enough. Gavin slid a note toward him. He didn't pick it up. I didn't look at him again. There would be time later for the part where endings look like consequences. My job now was repair. The weeks that followed were a controlled storm. We announced the recall the same day. The stock fell like a dropped plate, then steadied when we put out a clear plan to make it right. Laura stayed on as chief executive officer. She and I worked side by side in conference rooms that smelled like dry erase marker and takeout. Robert was removed by the new board. He left through a side door. I never saw him pack his things. The press swarmed. A sharp reporter named Nina Carter called our fixes boring and brave and ran a series that laid out the truth without drama. Clara and her team did their work. When her report landed, it carried the weight of those old emails without my voice needing to push. The cover-up was theirs, the fix was ours. For once, the world seemed to understand that difference. We started new rules that felt like housework after a flood, exhausting, necessary, steady. We said out loud that safety beats sales. We set up a simple hotline so anyone could speak up without fear. We put dates on the calendar for outside checks and didn't move them when marketing asked. I hired Sophia Park as our interim chief technical officer, someone who believed that strong locks aren't a luxury, they're the front door. Room by room, we cleaned the house I had been locked out of. The mess was ours. The repair was too. Mom picked a coffee shop halfway between their house and my office, like geography could make this easier. The place smelled like vanilla syrup and wet coats. She and Dad were already at a small table by the window, hands around cups they weren't drinking. I sat down, no hug, no hello. Dad went first. Was it worth it, Eliza? His voice was low but sharp, tearing everything down just to prove a point. I looked at the street beyond the glass, people fighting wind with their umbrellas, and then back at him. I didn't tear it down, I said. I stopped it from collapsing on people. It was broken from the beginning. Mom shook her head like I'd spit out something rude. Your brother, he's lost everything. Her eyes were red but dry. Family should protect family. I tried, I said softly. I tried 5 years ago. Protecting the truth is also protecting people. Dad leaned back, disappointed like a teacher grading a paper that should have been better. You always think you're the only adult in the room. I don't, I said. I think I'm someone who had to clean up a mess I didn't make. We sat in a heavy pause that made the clatter of cups louder. A barista called out a latte and someone laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. I slid a few dollars under my untouched coffee and stood. I hope you're okay, I said to both of them. It was true, even if it didn't change anything. I won't keep asking you to see me, that part's up to you. I walked out into the thin winter light, the doorbell chiming behind me. The cold air felt honest on my face. There were no more arguments to be had. The facts had done the talking. I let the hurt sit where it was and kept going. 6 months later, I unlock the door to my own lab and the lights come on to white walls and clean benches. It smells like cardboard from new shipments and fresh coffee that someone brewed too strong. Sophia's checklist is still on the whiteboard, neat boxes half filled, arrows pointing to next steps. It looks like a map I get to follow. On my monitor, a headline waits. Aura Home, under our Safety First policy, won a major deal to put secure sensors in low-income housing across the city. Below it, another note. A foundation grant, my name in the first sentence, to build more low-cost tools that don't trade safety for price. I read it twice, not because I don't believe it, but because I want to remember the shape of the words. I think about the first scene in this story, me in a borrowed room that smelled like damp winter, my name about to be erased. Now I'm here in a space that's mine, with people who speak up and aren't punished for it, with locks that hold. I didn't get the family picture I wanted. I did get the truth. I got my work back piece by piece until it stood up on its own legs. Sometimes I catch myself waiting for anger to arrive and sit in the corner like it used to. It doesn't. What stays is a quiet kind of pride. We didn't burn down the house. We ripped out the rot and rebuilt the frame. And when new people walk through these doors, they see my name on the wall, not as a trophy, but as a promise. Sometimes the only real revenge is repair. If you've ever had to fight to keep your name on your work, tell me about it in the comments. I read them. And if this story hit a nerve, subscribe and stick around. There are more stories where truth wins slow and still wins.